We'll begin tonight with Mike Ferner, who will be talking about, I think, an extraordinary project that he's been working on. Yes, about Lake Erie and the pollution. I just would like to begin introducing Mike by saying, I know a lot of you know him as, you're right, as the former president of National Veterans for Peace. I've worked with Mike for many years. We worked together on the Agent Orange legislation, lobbied Congress, lobbied to get that particular legislation approved. And the second trip that I took to Vietnam with the Veterans for Peace delegation, Mike and I worked together visiting Vietnamese and surveying land that had been harmed by the chemical. It is wonderful to have you at the New York City chapter tonight to do your presentation. And I understand that there will be photographs of the billboards that were designed in your campaign and program. So welcome, Mike Ferner. You're on mute. Need to take yourself off.
Okay.
Thank you.
I thought Ellen controlled all of us. I am. Thank you very much, Susan. And greetings from Ohio, where our state legislature is considering arming the teachers in school, and the state house has just passed an unlicensed carry bill. The next one they're going to introduce is to publicly fund gun giveaways on city streets. That's going to be the next Republican measure. But I'm glad to be here, and thank you, Susan, for the invitation, and Tarek as well for the invitation, and Ellen, who does what she always does, which pretty much is to make sure everything happens. I've been blessed by, or condemned to, I'm not sure which, 47 years of almost full-time activism. Some of that's been in the labor movement, a lot of it's been in the peace movement, but the default activism that I've engaged in has always come back to environmentalism. And of course, I can never remember who said this, but some wise environmentalist way back described the basis of environmentalism as knowing that everything is connected to everything. So that's an important concept in what Veterans for Peace is doing, and clearly in this particular program, the New York City chapter is putting on with the broad reach of issues and ideas that you're inviting. I think the most important thread through all of our activism, no matter what issue it happens to be, is democracy. Because we don't, you think about it, we don't so much have a drone problem or a military budget problem or a greenhouse gas problem or a Lake Erie problem. We've got a democracy problem. Because if people were actually running the show in this country, as opposed to corporations figuring out what we need to do to make the most money, I'm convinced people are smart enough and basically decent enough that we wouldn't be having the priorities that we've got right now. So that's really, to me, that's the most important thread that runs through all of our issues. It was brought home to me really clearly when I was in Baghdad in 2003 with Kathy Kelly and a group of people from around the world. Just prior to the invasion, a sociologist from Brazil and I were charged with drafting a statement to introduce the international activists who were just arriving in Baghdad prior to that invasion. And after we were working on this for a little while, he looked at me and just out of the clear blue, he said, you know, this isn't really so much a problem with peace or the military said, this is a problem with democracy because we don't, nobody wants any of this, but yet we have it. So that really struck me that he was able to articulate it that clearly in that kind of a situation. Well, getting on to what we're here for, the topic that I've got for tonight, I wanted to mention a couple of facts about the connection between animal production, what we're working on here in Toledo and Ohio with the concentrated animal feeding operation business, and the climate, which also we all know the military has a huge influence on too. For example, the UN Environment Program claims that meat production is responsible for 18 to 25% of the global greenhouse gases. And if it remains unchecked, it's going to be, that percentage is going to be up to 70% by 2050. The UN also states that cattle have a greater impact on greenhouse gases than all of the transport in the world. If you measure the contribution towards greenhouse gases of cattle, if you measure it in a CO2 equivalent, because as we know, a lot of what they produce is methane. So we can see that there's a big, globally, there's a huge impact. We can see here in Ohio, as you can tell by the graphic that Ellen put up there, Lake Erie and all the green stuff there is toxic algae. The animals in our watershed generate an amount of manure, and particularly if you're looking at the phosphorus in the manure, which is what drives these algal blooms. The animals in our watershed, if that were a human equivalent, it would equal the population of Ohio, Indiana, Delaware, Vermont, North and South Dakota. And to make it easier to remember, we shortened that to Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, and Atlanta. But that's what 25 million animals produces. And obviously this isn't even looking at the conditions these animals live in or anything like that. We'll get a link up on here. I'll share it in a minute if Ellen hasn't already, from a documentary called Cowspiracy. And it's got a list of facts related to this whole topic at the beginning of that, on that homepage that you can scroll down before it gets to talking about the movie. And just to give you a couple of examples, feedstock for livestock, corn and grain, uses 56% of the water in the US. It takes 2,500 gallons of water for a pound of hamburger. And it goes on from there. It's just the impact is so much greater than we're aware of. So just to give you a little picture of what we're dealing with here, this is a satellite picture of one out of more than 800 of these animal factories. This one is a dairy operation in a county outside of Toledo. And you can see where the manure lagoons are. There's literally millions of gallons of waste there. And that white circle off to towards the bottom right, you can see the little rows of dots there. That's a veal operation. And you may have seen pictures where they have these little houses, row after row after row. And that's where the male calves that don't get a bullet in the back of the head or sent off to the belt factory, that's where the male calves go, because they don't produce much milk, so they don't really have much use on a dairy operation. So that's, just to give you an idea of what these things look like. Now, there's 3,900 cows there. This is not the biggest one, it's one of the bigger ones, but that puts out an amount of waste equal to the 5 towns that you see here, and they probably don't mean much to people around the country. But these are 10 to 20,000 population small towns that are around Toledo. And just this one operation puts out as much waste as all those combined. So here's one that gives you an idea of what's going on with this when the phosphorus and nitrogen go down the waterways and into the lake, and it forms these harmful algal blooms. It produces a toxin called microcystin. And this is just a chart that shows you the relative toxicity of it, greater than PCBs or DDT or cyanide. So I mean, this is serious stuff, and that's what these algal blooms create. This is my hometown. We're located on the Maumee River, the largest river flowing into the Great Lakes, and we are upstream by 7 or 8 miles from the mouth of Lake Erie. And a couple of summers ago, that algal bloom came all the way up the river and visited downtown, which was a nice thing because too often it's out of sight and out of mind. And for this particular couple of weeks when this was going on, we heightened the awareness of the lake and the water quality by getting a 5-gallon bucket of this green water and putting a couple of dead fish in it and dumping it in the fountain right in front of Government Center in the plaza in front of City Hall, which is one of the things that we do on a regular basis, and the kind of protests that all of us engage in trying to get a message across. And what else we got there, Ellen? That's Lake Erie from outer space. And you can see where that algal bloom Toledo is over here on the far western edge of it, and it goes all across. So this is Niagara Falls over here on the other end. And it gives you an idea. This is the 11th largest lake in the world, and this is what happens to it because of what's going on in our watershed with these millions of confined animals. This poor guy was, I live right on Lake Erie, and our house is over to the right here. If you could pan to the right for about 50 feet, you'd see our house. And that same summer that all this washed up stream into downtown, a reporter from the local paper came out to take some pictures right on the shore, and lo and behold found this sorry catfish in his last struggles. We've kind of used this iconically as to symbolize everything that's going on with the water. This is a tanker that is a common way of spreading the manure. What happens in this industry is that you no longer go into the barn with a pitchfork and throw it into a wagon and then spread it around the field as fertilizer. Everything's got to be liquid because it's on an industrial scale. You can't deal with 4,000 cows if you're hauling the manure out of there by hand. So it's all reduced to liquid, put in those huge holding lagoons that I showed you in the earlier one, and then put into tankers and put on the field. And what happens, and what makes this so problematic for our area here, is that we have the highest concentration of underground drainage anywhere in the country, because this used to be a swamp, this whole watershed. And this stuff goes right down, you put it on the ground and it goes right into these underground drain tiles and zip out into the nearest stream running into the lake. This is not around here, but just to give you an idea, this is a feedlot out in the Great Plains, just to give you an idea of what these things look like. Over 95% of the meat that we eat in this country comes from factory operations, whether it's this or some of the things that we have here in Ohio. So If you do eat meat, and I'm sure probably most of the people on this call are aware of this, try to do it from a local provider that takes care of their animals, not like these chickens. This would be Mike Tork's bad dream here. This is what factory milk looks like, lined up for the twice daily milking, and they shoot these cows so full of bovine growth hormone to speed up the milk that they live maybe 2 years on the outside, on the, as long as they're going to live, about 2 years, and that's considerably shorter than the average life of a cow. They just burn them out. This is what industrial pigs look like, and there's, I think, another one of inside of a pig operation. There's, these things are gestation crates. They're in here, and they're not allowed to move, obviously. They eat and they lay there, often in their own waste, so they can put as many of them in there as possible. It reminds you a little bit of the drawings that we've seen in historical works about what they did on how they crammed people onto slave ships, just literally cheek by jowl. And this is how they live a good portion of their lives. And this is another shot. I mean, it's amazing. These things are just incredible to see. And what goes on in there is nightmare stuff. This is a veal operation. These are the male calves that are allowed to live, even though they don't give milk. So that's their fate. And another shot of a dairy operation that is cranking out the millions of gallons of milk. This is something that we did to mark the 5th anniversary. 2014, Toledo's water was shut down for 3 days in August. 500,000 people didn't have water for 3 days, and we marked the 5th anniversary of that in 2019 by putting on a skit. And we had politicians and the EPA and various people dousing Lady Erie with this stuff, and it was quite a performance. I think there's maybe one more of her. No, I guess not. A couple of typical protests. On the right is Marky Miller, the person who was the lead organizer for the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And on the left is Mike Ferner, who hasn't gotten his hair back yet from chemotherapy. But the reason that's in there is because we went to a hearing that the Ohio Department of Agriculture had to permit yet another one of these operations, and it's just all a joke. So we just brought our own rubber stamp and a permit that said the ODA permit, Ohio Department of Agriculture, a unit of the Ohio Farm Bureau, and just stamped it Rush, and that was the extent of our testimony. And this is my favorite protest picture. Some of you may recognize Sue Carter as the cow there. We decided to, this is the biggest neighborhood festival parade in Toledo, and we got our folks to turn out, and people followed these animals shackled to indicate confinement, followed them with a shovel and scooping up imaginary poop and dumping it into a blue bathtub labeled Lake Erie, or a blue wading pool. It was the most popular float in the whole parade. But again, all of us do these kinds of things to try to keep our sanity and make sure the issue gets heard about. During the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, there was one legal challenge after another, and the people who organized the Lake Erie Bill of Rights were not allowed to be a party to the lawsuit that followed after it passed in Toledo, it was put on the ballot by initiative petition, 10,000 signatures, and it was voted 60-40. It won at the poll, and immediately a lawsuit was filed in federal court against it. And the people who organized the initiative were not allowed in as part of the suit. So there's a bunch of us standing outside of the federal courthouse, which is to the right. And we furnished everybody with pots and pans and whistles during a conference call that the federal judge was having, and decided to let him know that we didn't appreciate democracy being locked out. So again, another way of trying to get the point across. Designed by Ellen. Designed by Ellen. That sounds like a good label. We provided the images, and Ellen put these together, a series of 5 of them. I think we have 2 or 3 here. And we tried to bring the issue of democracy in a little bit. You know, it's kind of hard to get into a democracy speech on a billboard. So the closest we could get was to suggest, you know, how did we get into this mess and who voted for it? Another, I went through a couple thousand pictures of animals in these facilities, trying to find the ones that would work. And this last one, I think, is when we did the news conference to kick off the campaign. We started with a goal of $8,000 or $10,000 to take out these billboards around Toledo, and we wound up raising $17,000. I mean, this was the easiest fundraising I ever did, and I think a good part of it was because at the time that we started this campaign, we decided as an organization that we wanted to not only focus on the problems that this industry causes our lake, but to also start including what it was doing to the animals. And so that's why the animals have a prominent place in all these billboards. We ran them in Toledo for 3 months, and we ran them in Columbus, right outside the State House, for a month, and a couple of them in Cleveland. So this is one of the ones in Cleveland on a really busy stretch going into downtown. So Ellen did a fine job. And we also, we had an international women's golf tournament here. They said a total of 150,000 people were supposed to be in town for this week-long golf tournament. And opening night downtown, they had a big to-do. So we had this banner put together and flew around there for an hour trying to get the message across. So it's a little pictorial essay of what we've been doing. And I'm glad to be able to talk with you about this. I mean, it's got some direct connections with climate, and VFP is obviously very concerned about militarism and climate. I just was a little surprised when Tarek and Ellen and Susan first brought up the idea of talking about this subject to the New York City chapter. But, you know, as I said earlier, everything's connected to everything. And I sure have enjoyed the opportunity to be with you for a little while tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I think we all thought it's an extraordinary project, an example of what communities can do when they pull together. So thank you. And please stay on. I'd like to next introduce Gary Butterfield, past president of the San Diego Veterans for Peace chapter. And also, Gary, I know, a member of the National Board of Veterans for Peace, who's working on and with its a national project on climate crisis and militarism, and brings, I think, into focus Veterans for Peace and the issue of climate change, and provides both an educational opportunity and an opportunity for activism to all of us to be able to do something about the climate crisis. Gary, I didn't know whether you were going to talk about Representative Barbara Lee's legislation. I thought I would use that as part of the introduction. Um, Representative Barbara Lee, I think most of you are aware, is an extraordinary legislator. She also, of course, is the sponsor for the Agent Orange legislation. And I just was looking at a short description of the legislation she brought before Congress on climate crisis. There's two bills, the Women and Climate Change Act of 2021 and the resolution supporting the teaching of climate change in schools, aimed at mitigating the impact of climate change on women and girls around the world, and encouraging the federal government, states, schools, and community organizations to teach climate change in appropriate programs and activities. It's wonderful, wonderful work, and certainly gets people informed and involved in the project. Some of us have heard the presentation and are looking forward to hearing this again, Gary. It's terrific. And thank you for coming to the New York City chapter of Veterans for Peace. Gary Butterfield.
Well, thank you for inviting me and our group and our work. This is an outgrowth of two conventions ago on the climate crisis and militarism working group, which has morphed into a project. But reflecting on what Mike said, everything is committed to everything. And I live in San Diego, and we call it the belly of the beast. They proudly brag about the fact that San Diego has the highest concentration of active duty military in the nation. And one of the things that confounds me, and I'm also a member of the San Diego 350.org group, but one of the things that confounds me is when I talk with the environmental people, they never mention militarism as something that contributes to climate damage. They only talk about how the climate crisis will affect the military. So I became a member of this group. I've also got a 6-year-old grandson, and I'm just so upset about thinking what we're bequeathing to future generations. And so that's kind of what drives my activism. I was drafted in 1967 into the Army, went through training, and spent about a year arguing with the Army whether or not I was a real conscientious objector or not. I guess they felt I didn't have the right religion. But anyway, I'm a lifetime member of Veterans for Peace and a lifetime member as well of the San Diego chapter. So I'm pleased to be here. It's not a pleasant topic, but this presentation was put together with the eye to perhaps refresh some facts to activists, to remind them, perhaps to give them some new facts, but with an eye towards getting veterans out of our silos and being able to communicate with environmental groups about the dangers of militarism in this society and how it affects the climate crisis. Now, over the past 2 weeks, we had what was called COP26. It was the Conference of the Parties of the UN, and it was expected to be a big opportunity for some real concrete action on the climate crisis. However, as probably could have been predicted, there were a lot of major disappointments, maybe a few opportunities, but a net result of it was that there was never a mention of military emissions at the actual COP floor. We had a workshop in conjunction with Bruce Gagnon's group about militarism and climate damage and space as well, that was in the adjoining sessions for the People's Summit of COP26. So although there was no mention of the emissions formally and little substantive agreement, we were encouraged a little bit by the fact that China and the US, through John Kerry's work, did come to some rudimentary type agreement on climate change. And there were tremendous amounts of people in the streets. On one day, it was estimated there were over 100,000 people marching for climate change in Glasgow. But as we approach this with climate organizations, I wanted to use this symbol to talk about the elephant in the room. And, you know, there seem to be a lot of elephants in a lot of rooms, but in this society, it seems that talking about militarism and how it impacts the climate crisis we're in is rarely heard. And, you know, accurate information about this topic is purposely kept out of the public's view by the military and the government. In fact, if we go back to the 1997 Kyoto Protocol on climate change, that incidentally the US did not sign, the US government pressured all the other countries to exclude many military emissions from even being reported. So this is purposeful. We don't hear this in the lay press. And when we talk to climate organizations, I give them a little background on Veterans for Peace, what our statement of purpose is, open it up with a statement by our executive director, Garrett Reppenhagen, about how he wants to see a world unlike the one we're headed for. His past as an Army sniper in Iraq compels him to speak out against the unchecked militarism that we see that contributes to climate destruction. It's no secret that we're in a crisis. In fact, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called this a code red for humanity, and looking at a recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, we hear about it in the news all the time about global temperature rise. We see more hurricanes, heat domes, fires, floods, crop failures, famines, population displacement. In fact, an example here is one of the most vulnerable being hit the worst, the ongoing famine in Madagascar, which was caused by a combination of a drought and a cyclone, created an estimated 600,000 people who are in desperate emergency need of feeding, according to the World Food Program. And of course, we continue to hear about temperatures rising. And what is a normal winter anywhere? What is a normal summer? So this group was formed over a year ago, and we wanted to look at 4 specific areas as we broke this down. We wanted to document the US military's boot print. And most of this is done from estimates, since we don't have official numbers. We want to look at the wars that this country has gotten into, typically for oil, other resources, and of course for profit. We wanted to examine how the overwhelming burden of both of these existential threats, the climate crisis and militarism, affect people of color, the poor, and future generations. And then, of course, as taxpayers in this country, we want to look at the tremendous dollar waste that goes to militarism and war, which could be better used, of course, for more humane purposes. Now, it's no secret that there's no such thing as a green war. Susan talked about Agent Orange and Representative Barbara Lee. Well, we still see impacts of Agent Orange. We see unexploded ordnance. We see contamination from burn pits that are shown on the right of this slide. One of the new ones we hear about are PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are a group of man-made chemicals known as forever chemicals. It's used in Teflon, many other consumer products, including dental floss, It can cause reproductive damage, but it's also a prime ingredient in the firefighting foam that the military uses. So we see this PFAS contamination in many areas surrounding military airports. And of course, uranium mining and processing and production of nuclear weapons, and even its perhaps ultimate use, would cause us tremendous problems. Now, I do want to take a second and talk about greenwashing by the military, because they're quick to point out that they do have some initiatives to reduce their carbon footprint. They have solar panels for infantrymen's backpacks. They have experimental biodiesel for naval vessels. They do have some initiatives, but we have to keep in mind that forever wars and preparation for wars continue to damage the environment, and we can't allow the Pentagon to boost the military budget in the hollow pursuit of greening the military. So when we talk to climate groups, we want to talk and describe the carbon footprint of the US, which is actually bigger than many nations. In fact, if the US military was a country, it would rank as number 47 among all the countries of the world in greenhouse gas emissions. And this is just from calculating estimated emissions from fuel usage. Think about that. One organization polluting more than many mid-sized nations, more than Sweden, Peru, or Morocco. In fact, if we look at an example, an average car driver would have to drive over 7 years to produce the same amount, to use up the same amount of fuel as a B-52 uses in 1 hour. The US military is the largest institutional consumer of oil and emitter of greenhouse gases. And we want to drive that point home to environmental groups that this is not a benign good neighbor that we have in the US military. Now, we see these in San Diego. They come every year, and in fact, we've had a program over the last 5 years to protest the Blue Angels. And is it practice, entertainment, or pollution? Well, every hour that they fly, they use up more than 9,100 gallons of jet fuel. That'd be the equivalent of a car being driven over 145,000 miles. Now, jets are the largest consumer, but we have to remember that the US military supports over 750 bases internationally. It maintains a fleet of vehicles numbering nearly 190,000, including about 70,000 Humvees that get 4 to 6 miles per gallon. And in fact, with the exception of 80 nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers, the entire military fleet of vehicles runs on oil. Now, we cite the resources that we use to back up our facts on our webpage through the VFP webpage, and we'll put the links in as we move through this exercise. But the sad fact is, we're also even militarizing outer space with the addition of the United States Space Force, with a heavy carbon load with its many computers, rockets, satellites, etc. And with all of these machines and bases, we want to look at the wars for oil, resources, and of course for profit. Now, at Veterans for Peace, we don't have an issue with troops. After all, many of us are former troops. We have issues with the policies that direct these activities. In addition to maintaining and supplying the over 750 bases, The US routinely conducts major training exercises involving massive numbers of troops and equipment with its allies. Major commercial oil companies enjoy the protection of the US military in the Persian Gulf and other places at no cost to them, but at a high cost to US taxpayers. We rely on Brown University's Cost of War project, and recently they talked that the money that was spent fighting the global war on terror over the past 21 years, over $7 trillion has gone to military contractors. And of course, the big five are household names: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. The residual pollution of any war and preparation for war also is important. In fact, there are over 900 current or former US military installations that are classed as EPA Superfund sites. So this is definitely not a good neighbor. Now, General Smedley Butler is familiar to most of us. He died in 1940 at the age of 59. He was probably the Marine Corps' most decorated soldier at that time. He fought in numerous battles and countries, but at the conclusion of his 34-year career, he became an outspoken critic of America's corporate and imperialistic wars. His book, War is a Racket, is still relevant reading. It's a short one. You should pick it up and reread it if you get a chance. Now, if we reflect back to one of the various operations that we had over the past years, one was going to be named Operation Iraqi Liberation. And that was, of course, until somebody looked at what that acronym would be, OIL, and changed it to Operation Iraqi Freedom. The point being, we fought a war with hundreds of thousands of troops in a far-off country, which required extensive supply lines, leaving a huge carbon footprint. And of course, it's all about the oil. We can't really deny that. That's a quote from General John Abizaid, the former head of US Central Command and military operations in Iraq back in 2007. Now, you would think that with the wind down of 20 years or more of war in Afghanistan, we would have some type of peace dividend, if you will. But we have to remember that we have to feed the beast. And now we're starting to see increased noise directed at China and Russia. On the left, you see global exercises of combined US, British, and Australian warships near the Philippines, while in Europe, NATO has virtually surrounded Russia with a ring of ballistic missiles, in spite of prior promises to refrain from such provocative actions. And of course, these war games, if you will, use tremendous amounts of fuel and emit huge greenhouse gas emissions. This is a map taken from a resource that we rely on called Base Nation by David Vine. And it shows the distribution of US military bases abroad, nearly 750 to 800 of them. You can see they're clustered in the Mideast. There's a host of them in Asia. I think Russia overall has maybe 18 foreign bases. China has 2. The US bases range in size from the smallest lily pads that typically provide pre-positioned weaponry and supplies to huge complexes, including housing, hospitals, bowling alleys, and their own power plants. But as many of you know, not all of these are welcomed. These bases in Okinawa have long resisted by Okinawans have long resisted US bases, including the one being built in Honoko. And I think I recognize some of the people in these pictures here. As they say, thank you for your service. But the overwhelming burden of both climate catastrophe and militarism falls on the global South, if you will, or people of color, the poor, and future generations. We know that civilian war deaths constitute the majority of casualties caused by war. And we're seeing an impact of militarism along many borders of industrialized countries. I read 2 weeks ago that Poland is reinforcing its border in Europe. And of course, we know about the US southern border. It's been reinforced to inhibit refugees from streaming north from Central and South America. The causes, of course, are complex, but climate damage to crops and water supplies are indeed increasing factors. But I'd like to point out the US government is dead serious about climate change, but not in the way you might think. Planners at the Pentagon look at it as a threat multiplier and have been quietly preparing to take charge of a planet shaken by climate chaos. In fact, one investigative journalist, Christian Peretti, refers to these types of plans as the politics of the armed lifeboat. And of course, we've already seen the devastating effects of drought on Syrians during their prolonged civil war, with millions of refugees having to flee their homeland to nearby Middle Eastern countries and Europe. Recent floods and widespread wildfires also contribute to population displacement even within the United States. So on the left, you see California as it was back in 2002, and it was a far different map than what we're seeing, which is even worse than that's depicted here in June of 2014. A new way of calculating the social cost of carbon is another way to look at the dollars that CO2 emissions impact upon a country and a people. Military emissions, even without an active war, have tremendous impact upon societies, including in the US. What we're seeing are increased costs of food, gas, electric bills, other energy costs. We're seeing property damage from climate-caused storms, which means dislocation, increased insurance costs, rising rents, housing scarcity, disrupted supply lines, which lead to higher consumer prices. For us in the United States, for much of us, this may appear as inconveniences. For others, it's the difference between life and death. Now, the last topic that we highlight is one that people relate to from their pocketbook. And that's the tremendous amounts of money that are spent on the military and its attendant industries that prolong it. This chart is a little bit outdated. It's April of 2020, but you can see that the United States spends more on military than the next 10 countries combined. Of the over 21 trillion spent on the war on terror since 9/11, 16 trillion went to the military, including nearly half of that for military contractors. 3 trillion went to veterans programs, nearly $1 trillion went to homeland security. In fact, to put that in perspective, if the US would have shifted that money over the past 2 decades, we could have already transitioned to 100% renewable energy, which, as you can see there, would be at a cost of $4.5 trillion. There are many other comparisons on what we could do with that money. I'm sure you could think of some of your own. This chart is a little busy, but I'd like you to focus on the blue part, which is nearly half of it. This is Biden's proposed budget, which incidentally was more than the Pentagon asked for. And I'm sad to say that Congress actually placed another $24 billion on top of this. This shows that both political parties have an appetite for the military that seems to be out of control. But this $765 billion isn't the total story, because there are other line items that are sequestered in some of these other pie chart pieces. For example, you would think nuclear weapons would be included in the military budget. Well, that $24 billion is actually over in the energy and environment section. I have to shudder to think that Rick Perry was in charge of that during the last administration. And on top of this, with all of this money, the military has been audited 3 different times. And quite expectedly, the Pentagon has failed all 3 audits. So we didn't put this together to just do an information dump on you. We wanted to emphasize the connections of militarism to the climate crisis. But there is good news and a good start. Susan talked about Representative Barbara Lee. Well, as we started this year, we actually had an appointment with 2 of Special Climate Envoy John Kerry's staff to discuss these issues of militarism and climate damage, the lack of transparency in emissions reporting by the military. Well, at the conclusion of the meeting, the consensus was it was a productive meeting, but I'm sad to say that that's the last we've heard of them. However, we have been successful in meeting with Representative Barbara Lee's staff, and she is actually the lead sponsor of House Resolution 767, calling for transparency of all military emissions and accurate reporting. Right now, we have 31 co-sponsors, and we are asking you to use our resources to help connect militarism to the climate crisis, and actually to call on your own Congress people to support this resolution. Now, in a second, I'll show you a portion of our website where you merely click on the icon and you put in your zip code, and it will populate your congressperson, and you can send them a message to support House Resolution 767. We also want to keep the pressure up and not let politicians, even Democratic or independent politicians, off the hook when they routinely vote for the National Defense Act, the NDAA. Both parties routinely do that. We would also ask that you look at your local sphere of influence, and would there be an opportunity for us, members of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, to present this slideshow or an abbreviated version of it to your local climate group? Is there a sunrise movement near you? Is there a 350.org movement? Is there an Extinction Rebellion? What about progressive Democrats? We addressed the Washington State progressive Democrats last night. We're addressing Sunrise in Beaverton on the 19th, and we did a program with Sunrise in Chico last week on Armistice Day. Is there a church group? What about concerned neighbors? We are all in this together, and we want to make it easier to get this information out to you. This is a portion of our website where you can schedule a presentation. You can look at our robust bibliography of resources, and you can certainly urge your congressperson to support Resolution 767. Now, also on our website, we've produced a printable brochure, and you can order bumper stickers displaying our message: U.S. militarism fuels climate crisis. Thank you for your attention. It's time we have priorities that benefit people and not corporate welfare in the war machine. We believe that many of these facts are ones that are not widely known by people in the climate movement. The fact that we have an all-volunteer military force lessens the opportunity for that type of visibility. We see increased jingoism with flag waving, particularly around Armistice Day, but we're stronger together, and it's up to us to make the change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gary. We'll move into the Q&A section of the meeting. That was terrific presentation. And for those of you who may not be members of New York City chapter, we will also be discussing our Move the Money project that is going on with the New York City Council members. It just, all of this work just folds in together. So thank you. And we'll now do Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Ellen, you'll be able to see folks, right?
Okay, right now I have Tarek and Zool already.
Okay. Could we go, Zool? Do you want to start and then Tarek?
No, beauty first.
Too late. I already put you up there, gorgeous.
Thank you. So I put in the chat to Mike to please discuss with us what sustainable farming might look like. Is there a place for any kind of meat consumption and production? What kind of farming would we care to see? And this is of great interest to many of us who live in cities. I'm right in the middle of Manhattan. We've been developing green markets for many years now. We have composting programs going, many of us in our own building. Many of us are growing vegetables on our rooftops. You know, we're looking to really green cities. So, but the question to you is in terms of any kind of farming, whether it's family farming or otherwise, can we see any kind of ideal, any kind of sustainable farming? And then just a second question, both to you, Mike, and to Gary, if you can take a minute to talk about the interconnectedness between these things, this kind of factory farming and ever-growing militarization. Thank you both.
You're muted, Mike.
The first part of your question about sustainable farming and that sort of thing. I'm not an expert on that, but just from what you were talking about, people are doing in the middle of the biggest city in the country, gives people a pretty good idea of what's possible. So, you know, raising food and eating are two pretty basic things that people can just use their common sense The more local that you can get food, the better. When you know where it's coming from, obviously, you can have a lot more influence in how it's raised. So, I just kind of leave that to people's common sense. Obviously, there are movements. I'm not plugged into them, unfortunately, but there are a lot of movements. Community supported agriculture is going on all over the country. There's just a lot of different movements that you can look up and find out information. And to your second part about the interconnections, I would like to recommend a really good book by Joel Kovel, or Kovel, Kovel. It's called The Enemy of Nature, The End of Capitalism or the End of the World. And he does a wonderful job of talking in Marxist terms, but not a heavy duty version of that. He has a pretty good critique of Marxism. It says they didn't do very well on the environment. But eco-socialism, and he describes that really well. I recommend that highly. One other one on climate that covers a lot of ground is Dardanelles, The End of Ice. And I would recommend both of those really highly.
I just want to point out that Joel Covell was also a veteran, and he was a big supporter of Veterans for Peace.
Can I add something there?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Gary.
As I look at the average age of this crowd, what struck me, and it really was brought home to me last week when we gave this presentation to Ken Mayers's group in Santa Fe, and Ken had invited members of the community, and we had one person there from a group called Yucca, which is youth something or other, and Ken can certainly chime in what it was, but all of the environmental groups have their plates full. They're dealing with these issues of animal and methane production and local water issues and such. And so we're not trying to usurp their activity, but we want to open their eyes to this component that contributes to the climate crisis. And so that we can get out of our silos and we can educate them from the knowledge base that we have. Because for some reason in this society, veterans have a certain level of respect in this particular area that gives us maybe some additional credibility. So like Mike says, everything is related to everything else. And this can be a vehicle to bridge a gap and get a conversation going with younger people who are more intimately involved in the climate movement and open their eyes to what militarism is doing to us as well.
Thank you, Gary. Tarek, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think I have two questions, fairly brief. But first, I just want to say I really appreciate the emphasis on the connections between these two presentations, which were both really comprehensive, and both of you really need to be applauded. They were both excellent presentations and very informative, and I thank you very much for that. And the two connections that I see, and maybe you want to comment on them, well, one you did already, is the lack of democracy involved in both our wars and militarism that goes on, which wouldn't happen if we had real democracy, and also the destruction that factory farms do. And the other connection between the two things is the incredible cruelty to living beings. And I remember what Albert Schweitzer said. It's a quote that I have on my email. He says, "Until he extends his circle of compassion to include all living things, man will not himself find peace." So we see, if we believe in that, how this is all connected. If we want to end war and we want to have peace, we also have to address what we do to the animals. But question for Mike is, you described how damaging to the environment what the factory farms around the Lake Erie area is. And we could see the huge damage done to that environment. Visually, you showed us, and statistically. What about in the rest of the country? How big is the climate and environmental damage that factory farms actually do? I mean, where does it rank, in terms of damage? Nationally, at least, not globally.
Well, I mentioned a couple of things, and again, I would refer people to the link that I put up there from the movie Cowspiracy. There's a link there, and it's got on the homepage before it even gets into the movie itself. It's got a really long list of facts, such as what you're talking about, Tarek, as far as the impact from this industry. And I just would refer people to that. But when you start to find out the amount of, just for example, water, that it takes to keep these operations going, it's just unbelievable. Like I think I mentioned 2,500 gallons of water for a pound of beef, 1,000 gallons of water for a gallon of milk. These giant factory operations will use 1 million gallons of water a day. And it's, you talk about how widely this problem is spread all over the country, and that's absolutely true. What's going on in those feedlots, the aerial picture of all those cattle in those feedlots, all that drains into the Mississippi watershed. And we can ask our friends like Diane Wilson what that's doing to the Gulf of Mexico. It's creating huge dead zones there. And Lake Erie is the second largest free toilet for these operations in the country. The Gulf of Mexico is by far the biggest, but our watershed is 8,000 square miles, and it's the second biggest Lake Erie is the second biggest receptacle of the waste from these. So our group is trying to put the focus on the conditions for the animals more than we have in the past, and people are responding to that. We need to do more of it because it's just so important, and it's a good reminder to keep that in mind.
Thanks, Mike. Gary, I just
Just
want to
one-
ask you what? No, I said I had two questions. I had one for
Okay.
Gary also.
Sorry, go ahead.
Always you guys do this to me. But anyway, Gary, this is just a quick question. It's a strategic one, more or less. Are you all free to do these presentations anywhere and anytime? For instance, I'm so impressed with it. This is the second time I've seen it, that I want to do it in Woodstock, at a public place in Woodstock, which we can do, where there's a huge screen, and I think I can get a pretty good turnout for it. So are you all available to really do this as much as needed?
We're committed to do this. We've done about 28 in the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks. We've got 4 or 5 more on the books. Tomorrow I'm doing one at the Villages in Florida. A huge, if you know the Villages, that should be interesting. But yeah, we're committed to do this, and we'd like to, first, we invite you to find venues for us. But if you feel so inclined, we will train you on how to do this.
I'm untrainable, but aside from that.
I've heard that about you. I've heard that
Yeah.
over the years. But to answer your question,
It's true.
we do have somebody in your time zone.
Okay, that's great. I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, thank
about
you.
this.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Okay, so
Tom.
Susan, we have Tom, and then after that in the chat, Jim Brown has asked it to. So go ahead, Tom.
First of all, I'm sorry I came in a little late. I was amazed by the costumes and the huge signs Mike's group. Astonishing creativity. I loved it. And Gary, I was blown away by the comprehensiveness of your talk, but more to the point, this is something I've been aware of for a long time and been scratching my head. How do we connect with environmental groups? And I think you found one of the big keys to doing this through our veterans organization. But I have a question about your experience, if any, so far with the environmental groups, especially the big ones. It seems to me that this is not only a taboo subject from the point of view of our government, but it appears to be a taboo subject with regard to the environmental movement or the funders of the environmental movement. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
You're absolutely right, Tom. And in fact, when we sought supporters, at first we went to groups to get their support for this House resolution. Barbara Lee's staff said, okay, we wrote it, who's on board? And, to go to somebody like the Sierra Club or other major organizations, it's a battle with some of them because they are corporately funded. Even 350.org would not sign on as a national entity, but we have a plethora of local 350.org groups that have. The same with Extreme Rebellion and Sunrise Movement. So we are working at the grassroots level just like this. And what we want to do is get this conversation going. Now, we have in some cases, we've toned down some of the attacks on the military, if you will, to make it a little more palatable to, mainstream environmental groups. But the connection is still there, that it's poisoning the environment and it's wasting our tax dollars that could be spent somewhere else. So it's a matter of getting people who are at least open to the message a little bit and then providing them some facts. And again, we're not trying to say that this should be their driving cause, but the effects of the military's pollution, while it may not be as big as methane, they're fatal, and we want to rein in we want to account for the emissions. We want accountability and transparency. Then we want to rein it in, and we want to rein in the Pentagon's budget ultimately. But when we go to a climate group, we're focusing on the transparency of emissions. Doesn't that make sense? Sure, everybody wants us to be accountable. I mean, if you cheat on your taxes, you get a slap on the wrist or worse. Well, what about the Pentagon? They're wasting all that money. And what about the pollution they're causing? We're seeing more and more noise about PFAs across the country. There are military bases where they say don't get pregnant and don't drink the water. And so these are significant issues. But the fact that the military is deified in this country makes it a topic, like you said, that's taboo for many of these organizations that have corporate donors. Well, this has got to be talked about. It's the elephant in the room. Let's reveal it. So I'm asking for your help. I'm on a campaign here. Why don't you each find us one opportunity so I can come back to you guys in 6 months and say, okay, we've got enough, but we don't. We got to get the word out. And this is a good connection. And most of the environmental groups are younger than we are in this group because we were in a draft eligible war. So the military people who come out have a different mindset than we did, have a different view than we do. So to me, this is an ideal topic to bridge the gap and to form some alliances that need to be formed.
I'd like to add one thing related to this. If you take a look at that documentary Cowspiracy, it was produced by a pretty young man who was interested in this issue. And part of what he did was go around to major environmental groups, and he cornered people like Bill McKibben and some people from the Sierra Club and so forth, and asked them questions related to the impact of livestock farming on greenhouse gases. And man, they ran for cover. You know, it's like Gary was saying, how big green organizations don't want to deal with military spending and military impact. They don't want to deal with the whole issue of what animal production is doing, because they don't want to offend people that they're concerned about. And I really like Ellen Barfield's comment about what she says to the poor schlub from the Sierra Club who calls and says that if they don't start doing something about the military, they're not green. So, and it is, and the grassroots strategy that Gary's talking about is incredibly important, because it seems like whatever organization reaches a certain size, and corruption just comes in, particularly around funding.
If you want to see a great politician's dance, Google Abby Martin and Pelosi. If you have not seen that, that is such a graphic dance of I don't want to talk about ism that I've ever seen. Abby Martin asked Pelosi directly, this was in Glasgow, why aren't you talking about military emissions, and why aren't they being discussed and reported? And it's blah, 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 blah.
Okay, so Jim Brown is, he didn't raise his hand, but you put a note in the text.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Brown from San Diego, and I have a joint question for both Mike and for Gary. But before I ask the question, I have to lead up to it for just a short while. But so, Mike, I've done a lot of water testing, and I've been involved in water as an environmental factor, in San Diego County as a volunteer. I got involved with one of the local lagoons. And I set up a water testing program, and in conjunction with Coastkeeper, and we found, just upstream, just about 3 miles, there's a dam, and the dam was put in 1955, and they used the dam for to water crops and stuff. That's what they told us. And the dam is an old dam. It doesn't have any spillways on top. It only lets out, when it floods, it goes over the top. But in drier years, which is most of the time in California, they have a safety valve at the bottom, about a 6-inch one at the bottom of the dam. And they say for safety reasons, we like to open that up and let it drain out during the any kind of rain that we have and stuff. And so I said, is that legal? And he said, well, I think so. And I talked to the local water boards who always catered to me, and said, oh, gee, that's an interesting question, Jim. And we'll look into that. And they never looked into anything, and they just kind of pushed me to the side. I'm sure we've all been doing that. So one day I went down there and I took pictures of that thing being opened, and I took water samples of it because I had set up a water testing thing, and it was loaded with the same stuff that Mike Ferner says, because what they were doing for farming with that dam, they were dumping all the waste from dairies upstream. Thousands and thousands and thousands of cows and all their waste have been dumped in that San Marcos Creek for years. And the bottom 20% of the water in that dam is nothing but cow waste. So when they open that valve at the bottom, millions of gallons come down and get dumped 2 or 3 miles down the road into my clean lagoon, of which I've been working at for 10 or 12 years, testing the water and say, why is the ammonia so high? Why is all this stuff there? That's not natural. And you go upstream, you don't see anybody dump anything. And then you test the water right out of the bottom of that, where you open the pipe up, and it's pouring out. So I bring that to the attention of the water board, who, we'll look into that. And they ignore me. So what we did is we caused a real scene. We filmed it going out, and we made a chart of the chemicals coming out. And we invited KPBS, our local affiliate, to come and take a picture of it. But beforehand, we also got the local high school to come in, and they heard about us and they wanted to do a video of it. They did a beautiful video. So in 1 week, the rain started and they opened up the bottom of the dam. The rain stopped. We immediately called everybody over to take a look. PBS came down with their camera, and the water just poured out of that thing, and you should have smelled it. It was just awful. I mean, in fact, it created problems on your eyes. Your eyes were smarting from all that. And so it hit the news. It hit the newspapers. The kids won awards at school for doing their environmental stuff and their expose. That thing got on our website. Went all over California. The water board invited me to become a member of their water board to shut me up. And I said, no, thank you. No, thank you. I know what you guys are going to do. If I get on the board, you're going to put me in the closet. That's the end of me. So my question is, you guys have made the most wonderful presentations and have really done your homework. Why don't you take a chapter out of my little story and create something that is happening? That word manure lagoon, that strikes such a visual picture in my brain, I can't get over it. And then Gary's PFAS, that's a big issue. And there's places where they know there's high concentrations of that. Why don't you just take a few water samples of those concentrations and wait for it to drain into some public water supply system and, call the press and have a little fun and get your project out in the papers and on TV, because talking to old people like us in these circles like this is all well and good, but where's he going? Why don't you stir the pot and do something like that? Is that a possibility? I think you guys probably have even more interesting things to take pictures of in your knowledge, because I can see where you've gone in your programs, And I say, is that a possibility that you could take it a step further and get some kind of an arm that just goes out and finds these problems and throws them in people's faces, with media? Okay, sorry for the long-winded question, but I think if you want to sell your product, you got to get their attention. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Comment from Mike, Gary.
My favorite character along those lines, Jim, was a guy in Chicago many years ago. His nickname was the Fox, and this was in the early days of the modern environmental movement. And he would get large containers of whatever the pollutant happened to be, anything from sewage to the meat packing houses, anything, and find the corporate head honcho or the political head honcho, and let's go take it up to their office and dump it on their floor. I mean, he just did wild stuff like that, and he became a legend in Chicago. We do a little bit of water sampling from the streams that are near these facilities. But it's tough because we're in Toledo and these are all, 50, 60 miles away, and you don't ever know for sure when they're going to be putting the manure on and so forth and so on. So we're trying to work with a few contacts that we do have in the rural areas and get them more interested in bird dogging, this sort of thing. And as soon as we get it to the point where we can rely on it's going to happen at a certain time, we'll definitely be interested in getting the press out there.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, well, the PFAS issue in San Diego, we actually took it to our local San Diego 350.org, and we had Pat Elder come and do a presentation to their policy and planning committee of about 20 people. And they looked at it and they said, thanks, but we don't have bandwidth to do it. So I think that's an excellent suggestion that you have, Jim. And George Jurassic and I In fact, talked this morning for an hour about what our next steps might be. And I think we just might be able to incorporate something like that to get the press involved, because the authorities are giving us the stall right now. So thanks for the suggestion.
There are other questions.
I don't see any hands.
Rachel Clark has one.
Okay, Rachel, unmute and I'll spotlight you.
Thank you. I tried to put the reaction button, but it didn't work. Sorry, but thank you for spotting me. Thank you so much for amazing presentations, both. I do live in the upstate New York, very, very rural area. Where I live, I see big farms, as well as individual small scale organic farmers. And having conversation with those small scale organic farmers, it's very, very difficult to deal with big farms. Big farms create, those toxic environment like we've learned from you today. But they have to do it in order to make a profit. So if we want them to stop this inhumane treatment of cows and the big production of manure, which pollute our environment, what kind of alternative can we suggest to those big farms? Because if they switch to organic farms, they cannot operate in the big scale. Whereas those small farms, they have many family members who can, chip in their labors and everything. It's very inexpensively. So we can say no to pollution, but simultaneously, I think we need to somehow keep their operation going. But what could be the solution in this case? Do you have any idea?
Well, on the micro level, again, going back to how we eat makes a difference. And, again, that is really the micro level. But what we're talking about here, gets right back to the fact that corporations run our country and we don't have democracy. I mean, these industrial production methods didn't come out of nowhere. They grew up fairly recently in order to take care of industries like McDonald's that sell chicken sandwiches by the gazillion, and all the other industrial food operations that we have, and they are heavily subsidized. I mean, there is a lot of public money that goes into these operations, or they wouldn't exist. The tax, from the tax code to the direct subsidies, and again, this is corporate lobbying, lack of democracy. So it's on the policy level that we talk to people where the change really needs to be. And again, if we had democracy, if corporate lobbyists weren't writing these bills, we would see a big difference, not just in food supply, but in everything. So it may be not a very satisfying answer, but on the individual level, do what you can to buy food from local and responsible growers, and then the rest of it is the politics we need to do to change this country around.
Thank you.
Gary, did you want to add? Okay.
I saw a hand from Laura and then it disappeared. Did you have a question, Laura?
Sorry about that. Can you see me? I have very dim lighting. I live off the grid in Maine. I've been for the past 3 years building a cabin by hand and manually clearing a forest and trying to do it in the best way possible. I would say that I'm totally off the grid. I don't even have a well, but I'm 75% fossil fuel free. So it is possible with someone with a very cheap income to do this. I certainly don't expect everybody to do it this way. I'm just doing it the way I can. But a lot of how we decide to eat our food, or how we buy our things, the journey that it goes on, there's a lot of energy that goes into that and the production of it. So supporting the local food movements and local food sovereignty for your local tribes, if you have any nearby, because there's usually heirloom plant varieties that are indigenous to a certain area that grow better, that require less chemical compounds when they're grown in the right way, in organic ways. And there's certainly meat alternatives to dairy that people could do in small areas. If you didn't want to give up meat, you could do quail or rabbits even, and raise them how you want. I've tried to raise meat rabbits, but I end up loving them all. So I'm like the worst rabbit farmer ever. But that's just my 2 cents on it. And I hope it helps give you some perspective. Just, go as local as possible and do all the little things you can, because they do add up and make a big difference.
Thank you.
So Barry Reich has been trying to get my attention, so I want to put him next. 'cause
Okay,
I-
Barry and then Nick.
Barry, there we go. Barry, you have to unmute.
You missed my whole spiel. Thanks a lot, Gary and Mike. Great presentations, huge problems. For sure, we're not going to solve the climate crisis problem with war. I mean, that's pretty obvious. One thing you can do, I'm the promotional guy with Climate Crisis Group, is you can put a bumper sticker on your car that opens one mind at a time. The people see that and they say, well, what's that all about? And at least get them to start thinking about what the hell is going on. My name and contact is in the chat. I'm selling them at cost for $38 plus postage, 50 bumper stickers for $38, which includes postage. So look me up.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Barry. Good bumper sticker too.
On my car.
Yes.
So
I think Nick Motor had his hand up.
Yes.
I got him
Yes.
spotlighted. Go, Nick.
Okay, thank you. At one time, I worked for the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, and I had the opportunity to inquire into food policy. And I think that the kind of thing that Laura, I think, was just talking about, I think is very good for people who live in rural areas. But these larger issues of mass food production, I think, require the United States to have a food policy, in some ways very much like what happened during World War II, where certain food products were deemed as not necessary and didn't receive subsidies and didn't have the kind of access to fertilizers, other things that, for instance, strawberries would be an example. The Norwegians at one time tried to have a food policy that was much more beneficial to health, which is also something that's very much more conservative of energy and less pollution. And the corporations really fought that. And it's a very fundamental problem all around the world, because at gunpoint in many places, food is being produced for export rather than feeding people in where they belong. So militarism is very connected with food policy in many places. And the United States is part of enforcing various food policies in Central America, Mexico, where we get a lot of tomatoes. It really has to start back. There's a big politics around, oh, we're not going to take your hamburgers away. Well, you know what? If we were in the middle of a war and we couldn't use all this energy for hamburgers, then we would not make cattle. And I think it's a very deep issue, and I'm sorry I got in at the end of the conversation, but I think what you all are bringing up here is really profoundly important and definitely relates to militarism, not only for the money that's used, but also for how our involvement in other countries has really screwed up their food production and ours as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
All good points, Nick. Thank you. It gets right to the heart of what empires do, how they touch every part of the human population's lives. And also, it gets back to the democracy issue. This country is running amok because the people who have the compassion and the wisdom to do better are not running the show.
Thank you. Eleanor, there are
I
more
don't
raised-
have any more hands, and we do have a bunch of other chapter business. So
Yes, I was going to
but
say.
I
what
didn't want to cut this off because this was a great discussion.
What I'd like for us to move into is move the money, because it strikes me that that's very much a part of the climate committee. Gary, did you want to say something?
No, I have to check out and leave. Okay, but thank you for the opportunity and find places for us to do this talk. I'm depending on you.
And I
Thanks,
just want to
Gary.
really thank both of you for
Yes,
being here.
thank
This
you.
was really amazing. So
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
It was a real pleasure to be in New York, even for a little while.
We'll come back, Mike Ferner. Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
oh wait, people, hang on.
Abdul wants to say something.
No, he doesn't. I was looking for Tom because
You're right. Our
Yeah.
next topic on the
Yes,
agenda
Tom.
that's very much related to what we've heard tonight is the Move the Money campaign. Tom will talk a brief description about the project and where it's going now and what the New York City chapter members can do. Tom.
Okay, and yeah, send me apologies to those who are from out of town, but please keep in mind that we in New York hope that you will imitate us where you are. So I think it was Gary who was talking about getting things down to, and both Gary and Mike talked about getting things down to the grassroots level. And that's what we're trying to do with Move the Money. We've concluded that for years, the peace movement banged on Congress's doors and we get pretty much the same results year after year with a small cohort of Congress members voting to limit the increase, but never actually starting up the conversation in Congress about decreasing the military budget substantially. And so we've created this Move the Money campaign, started about 3 years ago. It took us 8 months to find a city council member who was willing to touch this taboo subject of reversing gears on the military. And where we are today, they said it couldn't be done, but we are just 2 votes short of a majority in the city council now in support of our resolution 747A, which calls on the federal government to significantly reduce military spending and to redirect those resources into our communities. And what do we mean by that? We mean putting people to work, doing productive stuff, providing services to folks in the communities, public sector jobs, even some private sector work, all kinds of stuff, building housing, providing healthcare, creating education, artistic contributions and culture, you name it. And not the least would be environmental work to create a more sustainable city and a more sustainable country. We it was Gary who talked about making some contact with grassroots environmental groups, and we've had some luck in that regard. We've got the Sierra Club, New York City chapter. That's not the completely correct name. We have 350 Brooklyn and the People's Climate Movement have all signed on to our effort. Getting those groups to actually do work with us is a trickier prospect. We have 60 groups that have signed on. So but what's the roadblock? We've hit the thing that happens a lot when you have a movement that's important, and that is that the politicians who are in control pretend to either ignore you, to dismiss you, maybe to laugh at you. And we have that sort of problem with the Speaker of the City Council right now. And we spent much of the winter trying to bug him with phone calls and whatnot. Didn't get any reaction. But in the meantime, even through the pandemic, we've added to the numbers of council members in support of our resolution. So we have 25 out of 51 right now, counting the public advocate. 2 more, we would have a clear majority. So what we need now is for our Veterans for Peace members in New York City. Those of you who live in New York City live in one of the 51 council districts. We're going to provide you with a script, a short script. We're going to ask you to call your city council member. If your city council member is in support of the resolution, please thank them and ask them to push the speaker to do more. And if do more means let the hearing go forward, let the vote on our resolution go forward. And for those who live in districts where the council member has not come on board, we provide you with a couple of talking points that might be useful. One of those, by the way, I just learned myself this week. PBS reported that the suicide rate among veterans has gone from about 22 per day, which was horrific. And now it's over 28 per day this year. The pandemic clearly is one factor, but it's just an outrageous number. It goes to one of our points, which is our veterans need way more mental health supports. We have a lot of homeless veterans out on the streets of New York. There are a lot of points that just touch specifically on veterans care alone. And yet there are all the other things that we need in our communities. And there's plenty of money out there. It's sitting in the coffers of the Pentagon. That's our tax dollars. And as Gary pointed out, the money has just keeps going up. It even went higher than what Biden requested. And Biden added 25 billion, if I'm not incorrect, to what Trump had last proposed. So we're now at least 778 billion that is visible. And then there are the invisible sources, some of which he talked about. Let me repeat that. That's 778 billion. That's a billion is 1,000 million, folks. Just 1 billion is $1,000 million. And then you multiply that by 757. It's hard to wrap our minds around just the level of resources that go into military spending each and every year. So the last thing I want to say is what's been said before. When veterans speak up, guess what? The politicians and our neighbors and others take notice. So we really need to use our collective voice, one by one, with our council members and together. Very last thing is we will be out at City Hall bird dogging next Tuesday. We've been doing that since middle of September, and we've added 2 more council members as a result of that, and with the expectation that we'll get at least a few more. So please join us, and the Granny Peace Brigade will be out with us with their penny pole.
So time and place, Tom.
Well, the time is Susan and I and Bob, and I'm not sure who else are going to put materials in your hand. And as soon as we get them to you, we have to go through the list of members, figure out where you live, tell you, and then You will call your council member and we'll send you a very simple script that you can use right away.
But also the time and place on the 23rd.
Thank you, Ellen.
Oh, sorry. Well, there are 2 times in place on the 23rd. The place is the same, Murray and Broadway. It's the entry gate to City Hall. The main hour that they come and go is between noon and 1:30 before their big meeting. But they're having a pretty big meeting at 11 of the Land Use Committee. So those folks, those council members get there earlier. And usually most of them are driving in, so we have to kind of catch them as they drive in. We're not at a point where we're blockading them, but boy, they've been blockading us.
So we need folks
Speaker
out
has.
there Tuesday,
Tuesday.
starting at what time, Tom?
Well, if you want to be an early bird, come at 9:30. And if you want to hit the middle of the day, be sure to be there by noon.
And Tom,
Murray and Broadway.
Also the next Move the Money meeting in December.
The next Move the Money meeting is the night before, actually, on November 22nd.
So we're going to repeat this again. You will be getting information about what to say to the city council member to support Move the Money resolutions 747.
Okay.
And ask whether, and we'll tell you whether or not the city council person supports the resolution. If they do, thank them and ask them to contact the speaker, Corey Johnson. If they don't, ask them to support the resolution and contact the speaker, Corey Johnson. And we want you, if you can, to be there Tuesday morning, starting at 9:30. I hear you, Tom. You would like us to be there with Veterans for Peace flags, banners, whatever else we have.
Well, actually, we're trying to encourage all of our groups, if possible, to make a contribution and get a Move the Money T-shirt so that we have a visible, unified presence out there too. That doesn't mean you can't also. I wear my Veterans for Peace cap every time, and I point to it and then let politicians know I'm part of this organization.
So we can bring banners and flags and.
Well, I just want to warn you that flags are good, but we're really working to bird dog these politicians, so we can't be standing around with flags. We got to actually get nose to nose wherever we can.
Well, some of us have done that for years. Okay.
Art has a hand up.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, do you want banners?
Well, that's what I was just trying to say. There's a problem with banners.
What?
The City Hall guards don't like us putting banners on their fence. I mean, I think it's actually a free speech issue. But there are going to be other groups out there at the same time. And I should mention that the folks working on the nuclear pension divestment issue are also going to be there. And often there are unions out there. So it can be crowded. It's tricky. So we can have some banners. The banner should be, we have a little Move the Money banner so far that we put up on the fence, and they didn't force us to take it down. We will have a couple of big signs that sort of blow up one of our flyers and show the pie chart and so on. But our main visible presence is us wearing the T-shirts and getting in their face. And by the way, we do get in their face assertively. I wouldn't say aggressively, but assertively. We try to be friendly. We try not to let them get away with doing, saying nothing or just ignoring us.
Well, I would encourage people to come, and I want to say, when people do call your representative, always, if you're a veteran, make sure you mention that you are a veteran and you are a member of Veterans for Peace. And if you're not a veteran, still mention that you are a member of Veterans for Peace. It's not because we need the publicity, it's because it has an additional impact. The use of the word veterans and to let them know that there's an organization. And Tom, I'm going to bring banners because I believe in banners and I believe they add to the visibility and the overall impact. So I'm hoping that enough people come. If they don't come, we won't be able to hold them. But I'm hoping we have enough people to do your bird dogging, which is very specific, and you're probably an expert at it, and to also hold the banners, because the visual impact is important. I know that. And also, I am going to be the official photographer this time. I am coming with Ellen's camera. So I want some good background.
By the way, the best use of the banner, and the one which will have less competition for space and others in front, would be on the early side when they're driving in.
Right. So anyway,
Okay.
I think it's great what you've been doing and the other people who are working on it. And I just really want to encourage people to come out Tuesday. I hope we have a big turnout, and just come, just be there. You don't have to bird dog. It's a specialty item there, but come and be there so your presence is there and you're supportive of this very important movement, move the money. Very important. So thanks, Tom.
Okay,
What is the name of the?
Tarek, we have some other announcements to make.
Wait a second, Ellen. I have a question for Tom. Gee whiz. Tom, what's the name of that person who's blocking it coming to a
Lori
vote?
Johnson, Speaker
Lori
Johnson. from
Speaker
Chelsea.
Johnson. So we need to get on that. All right, thank you.
He's a lame duck, Tarek.
you.
We're going to be dealing with.
Right. So
He's a
one,
lame
right.
duck, but we have 1 month and business is being
Right.
conducted every single day in the city council, on and off premises.
Okay.
So,
We
right.
still have a
this is-
small window of opportunity to get something done this year before
This is-
we get to the next version of the council on January 1st.
That's great.
And I think what we talked about earlier is we need people to come out and to do as much and get as much support as we can right now. So Ellen, you've got other.
Well, there are two other important announcements of projects of our membership. One is the Japan speaking tour and one is Jill Godmello's film.
Right. So
So Rachel, are you still on? Rachel's on.
Yes, I am. Yes.
do you want to,
Just briefly, and then we can send out the information to,
Yes. Thank you so much for everybody's collaboration for this new VFP Chapter 34 New York City's annual event. December 4th, Saturday evening, we're gonna have annual VFP speaking tour, peace speaking tour in Japan via Zoom. And it starts from, 7:30, actually. Real program starts from 8 o'clock, but 7:30, there's a film viewing, special film viewing of Disneyland of War made by Chris Smiley, amazing young filmmaker. He dealt with how the US military recruit or try to familiarize to US military, targeting small children. So this will be very much related to the whole subject that we will be dealing with in the event. And we also try to make a film thanks to Anthony Donovan's support. We're gonna make a short film about the letter that, what's his name? Oh my God, Daniel Hale wrote to the Judge O'Grady right before he was sentenced. So that the amazing letter will be making to short film. Probably not full version because it's gonna be way too long, but I think he's talking about some kind of excerpt version. And followed by Susan's keynote speech. I'm still waiting for your script. And we have amazing 6+1 speakers. +1 came very late at the stage, but this guy is amazing. He is actually Afghan person who got refuge in Canada. So I couldn't miss this opportunity. He was willing to speak about his experience in Afghanistan. And thanks to Matt Ho, who originally introduced him to me. And Matt Ho's speech is unbelievable. This is really a must listen. He's talking about not only his personal experiences, but also a very interesting US military strategy, not only about Afghanistan, but why the US left Afghanistan and tried to concentrate on Russia and China. This is very, very interesting. And we also have a specialist of PTSD, both in the United States, Sam Coleman, as you know, and another person from Japan. She's been studying about PTSD cases during and after World War II, based on a very secret medical records, which was hidden and sealed for 70 years. And she went through it. And we also have a speaker from Veterans for Peace Japan. Who else? And also Japanese free journalist who's been back and forth between Middle East and Japan. And so I hope you guys all can join us, and please help me spread the words, because we have still small number of registrations so far. Thank you very much.
And Rachel, put into the chat again the website that you put in earlier, because there's been a lot of chat since then. So put that in, that has all of the details and how to register.
Okay, I'm going to put the link of a general online flyer. So if you go there, you will see both English and Japanese explanation, and click the button in English side, and you will get a link to register. Is it okay?
Yes.
Plus, we'll be sending out, the chapter will be sending out the information.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank
And,
you.
I'm going to keep posting on the Facebook page of this chapter. I did only one so far, but I'm going to keep trying to introduce each speaker. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Okay, and Susan, do you have the information about Jill's film?
Godmellow. No, but Bob.
Zul, do you?
Bob, do you have it handy?
Yes, I do.
Terrific. So just to remind everybody, Jill Godmellow has produced a documentary for students in high school about the American involvement in Vietnam. And it's wonderful. It's a 45-minute documentary. There will be a showing of both that new documentary and a retrospective of some of her prior films. And Bob, do you have the information?
I'm going to post it in the chat.
Okay.
At the
And we'll,
Anthology Film Archives.
Mhm.
But I will.
While Bob is doing that, if I may say, Jill is a very unusual, very important filmmaker in this country. She's been doing experimental films since I think the late 50s. She's professor emeritus of film from Notre Dame. If you're interested, I'm going to two of the films that she made. She's known, among other things, as the queen of replicas. She reproduced several films that were not able to be distributed at other places in the world. One is Farouk Says, that's on Friday night at 6:45. The other is Scum Manifesto, which is an extraordinary feminist tract, originally French and then produced in Polish by her. So she'll be there, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And I hope if any of you can get to Manhattan, please see, some of her films. She's really extraordinary. We don't realize what an amazing resource we have among us sometimes.
Thank you, Zul. Right.
And some of us are going to be going together on Monday, November 22nd, to the 6:45 showing.
Right.
So if people want to join us, maybe we can have a little bit of in-person socializing.
Is that the Vietnam repeat of the Vietnam?
It is, yes, yes.
Okay.
Just a quick statement about Farouk. This is about Dow Chemical Company and how workers are divided into departments where there is no communication and they don't necessarily know what they are producing. It's very powerful. We've showed it, I guess it's been a few years, at a New York City chapter meeting. It's extraordinary, and Zul is right. We don't always realize the wonderful resources we have for members in this chapter. And Bob will also send out the information about the various films. There's a number of them from Jill Godmellow. Are there other announcements for tonight? Okay, there's been some discussion about an in-person holiday party. Is there anybody who wants to talk about it and possibly send out a proposal? It's a tough time. We're kind of on the cusp of moving into a time when we can socialize and meet, but some of us are still a little concerned about doing that. But if there is interest, speak up.
Is there a space available?
We haven't searched that out, Zool, because some of us are still kind of hesitant about it.
Could we see a show of hands of those who would go if there were a easily available space?
Sure.
Okay, so if you can raise your hand in the raise hand function, then we can see all the people who aren't on the screen as well. So will I know you know how to do that? I see James William clapping hand. I don't know if that was for this. So I'm not seeing a lot here. And I have to say the numbers have been going up steadily for the last 3 weeks. New York State numbers are continuing to rise right now. So
maybe we could put it off. We've also kind of thought about Memorial Day as a time for in-person gathering, as we've usually done, but that's a ways off. So it just looks like we need to take this almost month by month.
And
Yeah.
perhaps you can join Tom on Monday in the morning, and those of you
Right.
who have gone to Jill's film on Monday evening. So great.
We're well ventilated out there on the streets of
Right.
in front of City Hall.
It's Tuesday morning Zoo.
Tuesday is City Hall and Monday, and there's a
Jill.
couple of days that Jill's documentaries or films are showing.
Yeah.
So
Who's going on Monday night to see Jill's film?
Tarek and I,
Susan.
I am.
And I'm going on Friday night, but maybe I'll join you on Monday night as well.
that would be
Terrific.
really great to see you.
Okay.
Yes. And anybody else who would be interested. Okay. Anything else? Terrific. Thank you all. I'm assuming we have a motion for adjournment. Anybody opposed? No. Thank you. It's always wonderful to see everybody at these meetings. Hopefully we'll get together in person soon. And Tom, some of us will see you on Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
night.
Night.